Oh, hello. And we are live. So, welcome to the 11th day of Creator Mass. Thank you, Polly. Yes, so that's the 11 of 12. So tomorrow will be 12. But today it's just you and I. And we may make some bauble earrings. So that will mean using Blender. And where is... and the accessory file. Which is caspits.com/IMVU. Drop that in the link in the chat. So the one that you want is the accessory file for this, standard accessory. So, in keeping with what we did the other day, we're going to... where did I put that? Hang on. Whoops. Start. Got that playing on. There we go. Right, so where's the file gone? Right, so in keeping with what we did the other day, making a super simple gift box from a couple of objects. So we made this from 1, 2, 3, 4 cubes. We did some very basic editing and removed some faces. So for the bauble, or a baubles earrings, we may not even need to do any editing. So let me just baubles. Right, so 1, 2, 3. Right, so we may be able to do this. So new. I'm just going to drop in some objects, so I'm just going to delete this. Ignore the structure of these things for now. Oh, whoops. So what we're going to do is use these 3 basic shapes. So we've got a sphere, a torus, a donut, and a cylinder. And we're going to do some basic object We're going to use these basic objects to make a bauble. Liana, I'm not sure if you can do that. So the gift box, if you open another instance of Blender. Because it's an accessory, I don't know if you can add a pose to the product in that way. I'm not quite sure how that would work. So I don't know. To answer your question, you were thinking about adding a pose to the gift box accessory. I don't know if you can do that. Right, so with the earrings or baubles, we're going to use these three shapes: sphere, torus, cylinder. So if you're not familiar with Blender, the basics, middle mouse button is what controls the view in terms of moving around. Shift middle mouse button, strafe. Control middle mouse button is zoom. You use the left mouse button generally to click and select, click on properties. Use the right mouse button generally to click on user generated objects or data. So these are 3D objects in the 3D view, or if there were an animation in the animation timeline, you would right click and select data points there. So let's clear this and start from scratch. Right, so default scene, it's got a lamp or a light, default cube and a camera. We don't need any of these, so you can either select them and delete them, or just hide them or move them somewhere else. But right click, select your objects, just right click the cube and press the X key or delete, and you'll get a confirmation. Just delete that. And we want to add a sphere. So we want a sphere, a cylinder, and a torus. But we want to be able to control the density, that's the structure of the meshes as we add them. Because Blender, once the objects have been added to Blender and you've done something to them, you can't change them. So first thing first, the sphere. So add menu, mesh, and we want a UV sphere. Zoom in. That's quite a dense mesh, so we can reduce that with segments. You can either left click the value, the arrows, left, right, or double click and type, press enter. And you want to reduce the segments, that's the number of columns, that's up down, so columns and rows. Take that down to 6, that's all right. And we can automatically generate UVs at this point, which are handy, so we can do that, enable that, and it'll generate a UV map for us for this object, so we don't have to do it later. Everything else is okay. Right, so that's the first object. We can left click the widget arrows. So the widget is this thing with the red, green and blue handles, and that's our manipulator. So left click and drag. You can hold control down to snap to grid and just move that to one side. next we need a cylinder. So add mesh, and we want cylinder for this. And again, that's a pretty dense mesh. We don't need that many polygons or surfaces. So again, double click or left click. That's fine. Radius, that's okay. And we can also generate UVs for this as well. So click that, and that's this will come in handy later. So that's object number 2. So left click and move that to one side. And then the torus. And these are generally pretty dense. So you want to watch these all the time. So reduce that right down because we don't need that many. And rows and segments, or rows and columns. And for this, we might be able to get away with 3. And you'll see why in a moment. And for this, can we generate a UV for this? Yes, we can generate UV for this. So click that as well. So there are our 3 objects. Just save the file. Save as. Right, so all we need to do is do a bit of basic manipulation. So move the sphere back to the center, move the cylinder back to the center, but we want to rescale this, we want to resize it, because this is usually the bit at the top of the bauble, the metal cap. So we use our, hang on, I need the annotation tools for this so that I could draw all over the screen. So we're going to use, oh, and it's red, it was green before. So we're going to use these tools, specifically these. And what those are our transform manipulators. So at the moment it's in translate, which means the selections generally move on a on a plane. Rotate and do that, and scale. So depending on the widget, depends on which axis that you click, depending on which axis you click, it performs a different function. And the widget, as it's currently designed in 2.79, if we want to scale uniformly, we have to click inside. Whoops, not inside. You have to click the, and it's very tricky to do. So this white, I don't know how clear that is. The widget is comprised of 2 parts basically. There's this central white part, and then you've got the axes. The 2.79 doesn't do this in 2.8, so you have to click to scale uniformly. You have to click the white outline, literally click on it in order to do this, otherwise it doesn't do anything. So we want to scale inwards. and you can hold Control down to snap to increments and switch or toggle between your manipulators. And what we're trying to do is just move that to the top of the bauble. Rescale. Move that down. And of course that's a bit too big. So, too high rather. So rescale that on the horizontal, or the vertical rather, which is the blue arrow. And just drop that into the bauble. And then the torus, so right click to select. We want to rotate that, so holding Control down so that we snap to increments, 90 degrees, and then we can do the similar. Well, actually what we want to probably do is move this so that we can see it. Move it upwards. Looks like a hand grenade right now. That's funny. Scale. Resize that. And literally, there's the bauble. So just basically 3 shapes, a bit of shape object based manipulation, and there we have a bauble. Save this. Save as. Wherever possible, create an instance, a unique instance. So this is our version save. So you've always got something to go back to. Right. So next, whilst we're editing the objects, what we can do with these is enable smoothing so they don't look faceted. So we select each of them in turn, and in the tool shelf we have smooth. Click that and it'll smooth the surfaces, or it'll give the surfaces the appearance of being a continuous surface. Do that for all of them. That's fine. And then what we can do, what else can we do with it? What we can try with this, so the bauble is a cylinder, it's a sphere, not cylinder, it's a sphere, so it's going to look smooth, generally speaking, no matter where you look at it. The top of the bauble has a very flat, distinct area, so, but it looks a bit mushy. There's no defined edge that defines the top. Let me just draw this. What we want to be able to see is a defined hard edge around the top there, and the same would go for the ring of the bauble. We would want to see a hard edge on this inside and on the other side as well. And a quick way to do that is to select your object. Whoops. Then in Object Properties, that's this button. It's the one that looks like a, with 3 dots. Click that and enable auto smooth and watch what should happen to the cylinder. It's going to facet. What we can do is change the angle. We can increase it. Whoops, that's the wrong way. There we go. So you can either left click drag, click the arrows either side of the input box, or double click or click in the text field and just type. So we need that to be a bit more, because a couple of those faces are faceted still, so there we go. Perfect. Same thing for the ring or the torus. Auto smooth. That's faceted the inside, so we want to change that, but we don't want to go too high so that we lose this hard edge. So let's type 49. Yeah, perfect. Right, save the file. Next, materials. So depending on how we want this to be textured, so let's make some quick textures. Buble. Is it B-A-U-B-L-E? Bauble. 1. So let's just go 128 by 128. 72. So this is going to be material or texture 0. So just fill this with a color so that we can see it. Add some text so that we have something that indicates the orientation. Save that. Whoops. Oh, hi Jinx. And wherever possible, when you are saving your textures, the ones that you are creating initially, just say, obviously save them as your whatever application you're using, the proprietary format that they have, so that you've always got something you can go back to. So we want to squash that. Save it as TGA. Yep, it's very quiet. Yeah, very. Because it's Christmas Eve. Listing out for Santa on the roof. We want another 2, so new. Bauble top. Uh, 120, that's fine. Make this green. That's texture 1. Save. Squash. And then the final one, number 2. bauble ring. I want to, well, can actually go smaller for that. 64 by 64. It's tiny. Make that red. I have to reduce the size of the font, but that's 2. Squash that, save, TGA. So basically what we've done is created 3 images that correspond to the different parts of the bauble. So they're very simple, just flat colours. They can be anything you want. So back to the bauble. No, it means the number of viewers are the number of people that are actually watching, but don't necessarily need. Yes, so you don't need to be logged in to actually watch the Twitch stream, which is very cool. So there are however many people watching, and just you two. Is it you two or 3? Excluding oneself. Yeah, it's just you two chatting, because everyone's probably looking out for Santa. Right, so we want to apply materials to these, which are those textures that we just created. So first things we need to do, make materials. So we need to select our objects in one at a time. Material properties. So that's the spherical button with a bit of shading. So that's that button. And none of these have any materials assigned to them, so we have to create them. So we can do this in batches. So Twitch Bublier bauble 0 new Twitch BAU 1 and Twitch two. Oh, hi Miyaka. Oh yes, if you haven't seen what Miyaka, watch as an off topic. Miyaka is streaming the printing of some 3D pots, and it's simultaneously quite slow going but quite quick at the same time. So that's an interesting watch. It's not quite as bad as watching paint dry, but there you go. So what we've done, if you ever wondered why IMVU has these peculiar naming conventions for their materials, so they have these square brackets surrounding a number, it's because, well, aside from the fact that it's the way that 3D Studio Max identifies materials within 3D Studio Max, what it also means is that we can use the same name So twitch bauble for each of the objects, which would otherwise be a duplicate. You can't do that. So the number makes each of the instances unique. So we have 0, twitch bauble 0, twitch bauble 1, twitch bauble 2. And this will come into play later when we join everything together into a single object. So we've got our basic material. We need to assign a texture to this. So each one of these needs a texture slot. So we have to do the same thing again. Twitch but we don't need to follow the naming convention for texture properties, only for material properties. Oops, so that should be 0. But if you use the same name, you still will need to make them unique, or I make them uniquely identifiable. So T one. So it's always just easiest just to use a corresponding number. So that's number 1, and that's number 1. Two. Right, so that's the second batch, which is, so we've got batch 1, which is creating the materials, batch 2 is creating the textures, whoops, and then batch 3 is going to be assigning the images that we created. So in Blender, it's just a question of selecting the object, making sure that you're in texture properties, and clicking the open button. So scribble on screen. So you need to be in texture properties, and then down in the image section, click on open. That's if you have images available for use. So open, and this is number 2. We are in accessories. So there's number 2. These have been intentionally assigned in reversed order because I'm going to do something. So that's number 1. And then we have 0. So to make this easier to see, so what I'm going to do is adjust the materials so that the objects are using a corresponding color. So in the diffuse section of material properties, click this color field, this thing, and it'll give us a color pop-up. So that one's red. Move the mouse aside and it'll automatically close. That one's green. And that one is yellow. But looking at the textures, textures. 2 is the tiddly one. And that's the one for the rings. So they've been assigned incorrectly. So 0 should be the bauble and 2 the ring. So the easy fix for that, select the object, make sure you're in materials, and click the Browse Material to be Linked button. So that is this button. And that'll give you a list of the materials that we created, which can be assigned to the object. So we need to swap the bauble and the ring. And that should automatically swap the texture and the image that's assigned to the object. So number 1 was correct all the time. So save the file. Let's check the UV map for these objects and see what was automatically created. So for that we can switch layout. So that's this section at the top. And we've got one for UV editing, which will present a layout like this. So on the right we've got the 3D view, on the left we've got the UV image editor. So if we go into edit mode, which is needed for UV mapping, there we have the automatically generated UV map that was created when we made the object. So all we need to do before we do that, actually switch viewport display mode to texture. This means that we'll be able to see the texture assigned to the object. And then in the image editor, down at the bottom here, we've got Browse Image to be Linked. And this is the cap. So this is the green one. Exit edit mode, select another object, enter edit mode. And there we see the UVs for the sphere. So browse, and this is the yellow one. Yes, the yellow one. So that's the yellow one assigned. Exit edit mode. Click the torus, edit mode. And that's the torus unwrapped. And this one is the red one. So we don't have to muck around with UV maps. Well, hey, exit UV editing. Exit edit mode. Let's switch to texture mode so that we can see what we're doing. That's our bauble. So save the file. What textures, chat? Oh yes, right. So yeah. Oh, thanks for the cheer. Yeah, so there's a question there about textures. Yeah, the way that you would actually do this differs. The way that you would do it with a bit more experience differs from just doing it this way. This is not for experts. What we're doing here is for very well, it's basically for beginners. This is looking at meshing something the way that a beginner might understand 3D, or Blend, I should say. And that means using textures and materials and objects in a way that a beginner would understand the principles of making something in 3D. So we're not making any of this stuff. This bauble is not being made as you would make it if you were working for a game studio, for example. So if you were making bauble grenades for Fortnite, for example, you wouldn't make them like this. They wouldn't be made like this, and you wouldn't use three textures and 3 materials for one object. It wouldn't be done like that. So this caters to beginners basically, and so that's why. Right, so, and this is now where we're going to see why the unique names come in handy, because what we're going to do is join these together. And what we could do with this is, because we want the earrings to, the bauble earring, what we can do is use the torus, the center of the torus, which is where the widget is. That's the origin or center of the object. We can use that as the origin for the whole object. So we need to select all the objects and join them to the torus, but we need to select the order in which that's done. So first right click the bauble, shift right click the cap, and then shift right click the ring at the top. That basically means that the other 2 objects, so the top and the bauble, will be joined to the ring. And to do that, once you've got them selected in that order, so object, join. And what that does, and why we use unique materials, is because we've now got... Have I got space in the middle of that one? Hang on. Oh yeah, so it is right. Tiny, teeny writing. So we've got 3 materials assigned to the one object. And that's why, so you can use the same name, but so long as they have a numerical append which differs, you can continue. You can have as many names as you want, just so long as the number's different. And in Blender, we can also reorder them. So if you wanted to, this doesn't affect the export or IMVU, but if you wanted to, you can reorder them by clicking these 2 buttons, these arrow buttons. So that's one bauble. I think we'll probably only just do the one. I don't know if we'll have time to do 2, because we've got to turn this into an earring. So let's save the... Oh, we need to do something before we do that. Right click your object, select it, and then in Object Properties, so that's this button, that's the cube, very crude 3D cube. Rename this, well, I'll just Twitch .mesh and save this file, save as 6. And what this will do is it'll make it easy to identify the object, because otherwise they use generic names that Blender assigns. So what we need to do now, so we've got our bauble earring. We need the accessory file. That's the avatar accessory file. Where is that? Where is that file gone? Oh, there we go. This is called female 04 brackets accessories. So if you go to the link that was posted earlier. I'll just drop that back in text again. So that's catspits.com/IMVU. You'll get a page with all the necessary files. For making stuff for IMVU. So that's the accessory file. Each one of these bones is a separate armature, and that's important for accessories. So it doesn't matter where the bone is, each one of these is separate, and they contain 2 bones. Let me just turn the names on for these. Yeah, names. So, attachment root, the text is tiny and it doesn't change scale as you zoom in. So, attachment root and attachment node. Those 2 bones are generally needed or necessary for accessories. And what you do if you are doing just a straight accessory with no animation is you link your mesh to the armature that's associated with the body part where you want your accessory to appear. So for an earring, it's going to be the one that's associated with the head, which is, where is that? It's that one. There are 2. Well, within this Blender file, there are 2 accessory points, 2 accessory armatures in the same place. One is an accessory for accessories, funnily enough. So that would be the glasses, I think, if I remember correctly. And the other one is for accessories that are associated with the head, because that is the head bone, or it corresponds to the head bone. So we're going to use that one. So the accessory file open. What we need to do is append the mesh that we created. So file, append, and we now need to find it. So accessories, Twitch earrings, 6. So what that's doing, when you append, mentioned this the other day when we were doing the gift box. When you append, what Blender essentially is doing is treating Blender files, the .blend files, as zip archives. So in the same way that you can open an archive, a zip archive in WinZip or WinRAR or whatever it is that you've got for opening them, or even Windows operating system, you're actually looking at the contents of an archive. And it's the same analogy with blend files when you are appending them. So if you click on one, what you're seeing are the contents of the zip file or the blend file. What we want are objects. So click that, and there is the mesh that we created. So we left click to highlight that and append it. And it will probably be teeny tiny. And it will be in the scene, but because it is teeny tiny, you can't see it. So just to double check, a quick way or an easy way to do that is select, not select, view, view selected. And there is our teeny tiny bauble. So if I scale out whilst we're watching that, that's how teeny tiny the default scale difference is between Blender and IMVU. That is a teeny tiny. That is teeny tiny. But you can use that little trick because whenever you append something into a Blender file, it's always selected. So if you use that, you can zoom in automatically to where the object is to find it, rather than trying to hunt around the scene to see where it is. So what we want to do here is scale that up. So we can use the scale widget and again left click, drag the white circle, and that'll scale us upwards. Or an alternative is to press the S key, S for sugar, and that puts us into freescale, which means the object moves or scales, changes its size relative to where the mouse is. But what we can do is press S for sugar and then type a value. That's too small. So without doing anything in terms of confirming or undoing something, what we can actually do with typed values is press the backspace key and it'll clear the values. If you watch the bottom left corner of the 3D view, which is, whoops, down here, when we're scaling or manipulating objects, some data will appear or some coordinates. So if you watch that, so 15 was too small, so let's do 20. That's all right for now. So press enter to confirm, and that scales us up uniformly. Transform widget, and then move us up into position. And what we can do, because the rotation of the scene has got a little bit screwy, with the object selected, we can do view selected again, and what that will do is focus on the object that's selected and change the way that the 3D view now rotates. So we can now more easily rotate around the object that we're working with. So what we want to do is rotate this so that the ring matches the earlobe, so that it looks like it's passing through. So use your transform widgets. So that's translate, which is left, right, front, back, up, down, and rotate, and just get it positioned where you want it to be. And if you want rescale, so again you can use the widget, or you can just press the S key, S for sugar. And because we used the torus origin point, it now means that when we scale, the object scales from that point. And if we position that where we want the earring to appear, it'll scale quite nicely relative to the ear. So let's make this just a little bit bigger. That'll do. That's a big earring. That's huge. That's polystyrene level jewellery. So double check your position. Yep, that looks okay. And then save the file. Save, save, save. Save as. Now we need to be in accessories. And this is, so Twitch earrings 6, but this is now version 7. So you need to be careful that you don't save over the top of the accessories file. Save. Right, so we've created an earring. We've created a bauble earring. Assigned materials. Joined everything together. Brought it into the accessories file. We didn't need to fiddle around with the UV maps because we used primitive shapes. That was all auto-generated. So we've appended it to the accessory file, positioned it. So the next bit is to link it to the appropriate armature. So let's just hide this one. Save getting confused. So select it, right click, object, show hide, hide. The shortcut key for that is H. Same for the head. So press the H key and all the other bits so that we can see what we're doing here. Now let me just double check. It is that one. Yes, that's the head. Head attachment. Yeah, because that's the very, very top bone of the skeleton. Not quite sure what that bone is for. So what we want to do is associate the bauble with the head armature. And the way that we do that is first creating a vertex group. So select the object, edit mode, double check that everything is selected. So we need to usually deselect all. That'll deselect any active selections. So let's say, for example, we just had one face selected. If we wanted to select everything, we have to first deselect that face. This changes in Blender 2.8, by the way, but for Blender 2.79 and below, that'll deselect that, and then we can reselect everything. So this is crucial. So make sure everything is selected. Then in Object Data Properties, so that's the triangle button again. So draw, that's this one again. We need to be in Vertex Properties and we want to click the plus button. So click that, creates a generic group called Group. Double click, that'll highlight it for editing, and what we need to call this is attachment root, and it's case sensitive, so that's uppercase A and uppercase R, so A for Apple and R for Robert, and assign that to everything that's selected. So click the assign button and then double check with select and deselect. Excellent. Exit edit mode. The next thing to do is we need to link the object with the armature. So right click the object, shift right click the armature, and then object, parent, object, and that'll give us this pop-up, and we want object keep transform. We use keep transform because what this does is it will keep the position of the object in space or within the scene. It'll use its actual position where it currently is as its position as an object relative to the armature, because sometimes they can reset. So that now means that if we right click select the armature and move it, so that's the G key, this is free translate, the bauble now moves with the armature. An optional extra step that's not always necessary, right click the bauble again, that's the mesh, and then in modifiers which is the wrench icon. So that's a wrench. Wrench icon. Click that. Click the drop down, add modifiers, and you want armature. And then because there are a lot of armatures in this particular file, click the, what do they call them, droppers? The little dropper icon. Click that, you get your little dropper. Move that over to the armature that you want to use, which is the head attachment. Left click and it'll drop it into the object. And that parents the two together. So there are two ways of linking things together. You can either parent them directly, so you're making a direct link between two objects, so that's the mesh and the armature, or you can use an armature modifier which links them, but it does it in a slightly different way. So save the file. And then the next bit is to export, but we have to do something for that. So unhide. No, I wonder if we can do it this way around. So let's try this. So select the objects that we need to keep. It doesn't matter about the selection order for this. So that's the head skeleton, head armature and the mesh. And then use select inverse. That'll deselect the objects that were selected and select the objects that weren't. We need to get rid of these, so press the delete key. We've got some hidden objects in the scene, so we need to unhide those. And we need to just get rid of those as well. So right click and then just hit delete. So what we're left with should be just the bauble and the armature. So let's do a quick save of this just to, so we don't have to go back and forth all the time. So 9. And then we can export FBX. So we want to leave selected objects deselected. Deselect use modifiers, but keep the apply modifiers. Deselect, make sure that this is always deselected, add leaf bones, and we can leave animation, that's fine. So we're in accessories, we've got our file name, and then export. So we've exported an FBX with our earring bauble. So next, create mode. So derive a new product. Hopefully this will work. Accessories. Go. So that's the default accessory file, obviously. For those that don't know, that's the default accessory file. Not obviously. So to import the FBX, so that's FBX import, click that, load FBX, accessories, tra-la-la. Where's the earrings? There's the earrings. So click on the earrings. So it'll do this. If you're using FBX, this is a good way of testing or checking whether your FBX was exported correctly. If you import an accessory FBX and you don't get this select skeletal root dialog box, it means the FBX wasn't successfully exported properly. Well, it was successfully exported, but it wasn't exported properly. So it's missing, because what can happen is if you, during export, if you set selected objects, so during export, if this setting were active, so let me just do a bit more drawing on screen. So if this option were active, what can sometimes happen is an incomplete FBX export. No idea why, because it only does it with accessory files. I think it has something to do with the number of armatures that are in the scene if you try and export an accessory. So you have to remove all the armatures and all the meshes that are in the scene that are not part of your product or your item, and then force Blender to export the entire contents of the scene, so you deselect selected objects, and that forces Blender to export everything in the scene so that it properly formats the FBX file. Cancel that. And the check for that is this dialog box that pops up, and it'll usually give you two options. For FBX, you want the option that gives you the fewest bones, because FBX itself is a hierarchical structure. So there are 3 bones shown for one of these and 2 bones for the other. The one with 3 bones is including the root bone of the FBX file itself. So if you were to open an FBX file in a text editor, right at the very top of the FBX file is a reference for a root node. And this can cause problems when you are importing your FBX files, because it then reorders the skeletal hierarchy of your FBX. So that's something to check for when you are importing your FBX. Make sure you're using the one that does not. It's usually 1 bone. And then we've got our mesh, baubles, same to you, sir. So for this, mesh ID is 2. Need to change the scale, 0.01. It's got our materials, so it's Twitch bauble 1, 2, and 3. Well, it's 3 materials, 0, 1, and 2. Import. That's fine, that's fine. And there is our bauble. Perfect. Or as, what's the thingamajiggery, the little girl from Despicable Me. Awesome. And it's, I say, as easy as that, but that's it. That's your bauble. Blender, IMVU automatically assembles the FBX file and will attach it by default to the head bone. But in this instance, because we are using the head bone for the accessory, we have got a bauble instantly in place. So I'm just going to save this. Save. Twitch. B-A-U-B-L-E. Twitch bauble. Meshes. Let's have a look at the meshes. So we've got our textures. Normally, if you use Cal 3D, I don't think this works, but if you use FBX, the FBX importer will convert the TGA images into, although it says .tga here, they're not actually TGA files, I think. They're actually JPEGs. I think they're JPEGs. Let me just double check. Oh no, it keeps it. Oh, that's interesting. So that's the contents of the project. So if you click that little folder icon, it'll open up this project contents folder, and it'll show you everything that's in your file. So we've got our XRFs, these are the converted texture material files, XMF is the mesh, and this really weird name thing with lots of percentages, that's the skeleton, and then we've got our textures, and they're still in TGA format, which is interesting. We don't need two-sided, we don't need that because those are associated with the spectacles, the shades. So we can apply that, save again, and that is our double check assets. Make sure we've not got anything in there, that's okay. So yeah, that's the bauble earring. So of course if you wanted another one, you'd repeat the process. If you wanted them to be the same, you wouldn't really need to you wouldn't need to do much. You could duplicate this bauble because you've already done the work in the accessory file and just move it over to the other side. So if I open 8 and hide the head, so if we wanted two earrings to be exactly the same, we've already got this file, we've already got the accessory. Let me just hide those again. We've already got the armature set up to control the bauble. So we've got our accessory, not accessory, vertex group. So all we need to do is duplicate that bauble mesh. So right click, object, duplicate objects. That creates a duplicate which is linked to the mouse. Right click will reset it, and then we can move it across. So using the widget that we can just about see through the mesh, and then use your widget tools to rotate and position. And in fact, what you might want to do is, so that you're not looking at something that looks like it's a mirrored duplicate, what you can do is rotate this completely around the other way. But of course it depends on whether you've got a pattern assigned as your texture. So let's save this, see if this works. So double check that, hide that, hide that, hide that, hide that. Grab the head bone and make sure that, yeah, so that's okay. Save as, so this is actually 10. So let's see how well this works. So we need to hide these temporarily. Select the objects that we want to keep. So that's the baubles and the skeleton. Invert the selection. Delete all of those objects. Right, so unhide the bits that we've hidden previously, which is Alt-H. That's the shortcut key. Alt-H. Delete those, and that will leave us the baubles. So what we can do now is save that so that we don't go back and forth. So this is 11, and export the file. Hopefully this should work, because what can sometimes happen is if you duplicate something that's already parented to a skeleton, if you move it across, what can sometimes happen is the object that you've duplicated and moved will reset itself back to its original position. So be mindful of that. So export, FBX, FBX 11, so that has to be deselected, so selected objects has to be inactive. Use modifiers, add leaf bones, deselected, armature, animations, that's fine. Export. So that's one bauble. Derive new product. Accessories. Go. So that's the default goggles. FBX import. Load FBX. And we want number 11. So again, we've got the skeletal selection. So we want the one with 2 bones. And because we duplicated the objects, we've got 2 meshes in the scene, and it's picked up both of them. So we've got left and right, although we've because we duplicated the bauble, Blender has created an append, numerical append, which is a 001. So 0.01. So we want, this could be tricky. So let's try to, I think we may have to change this to, and let's just try 2 and 3 and see what that does. I don't know if that will work. Oh, it has worked. Excellent. So there you go. Baubles. Same user. So save as Twitch. Twitch baubles. And that's it. That's your Christmas baubles. And of course they are using the same textures. There are 2 meshes. So if we go into, it'll now show us a few more entries. So there's 001 and the original. Right, yes. Now that is, I'm not going to put on a smaller head because I was actually going to mention something about that, Miyaka, so thanks for the prompt. So, now this is kind of important now for accessories generally, because these earrings or these baubles perfectly match the default avatar. They match perfectly. They're exactly where they need to be. But if you put on, if you use a different head, I don't have any, do I have any different heads? I don't think I have any female heads. Do I have, no, I don't have any female heads, unfortunately. So that's an issue for accessory creators. So you could create your accessories and they work perfectly fine with the default avatar, but someone else could purchase them, and if they're using one of the new, the more modern heads that are different, they're all different sizes. The earrings may be at her cheekbones. So what that means is that you would then have to go back to the original file and make adjustments to the, not to the position of the bone, but the position of the meshes relative to the bone, because it's the mesh that's different on the different heads. They're attached to the same underlying skeleton, but their design, the way that they appear, differs. So that is something that you do have to watch out for, and it's the same for any part of the body that an accessory is going to be used on. So that might then mean that you end up making, instead of just one set of bauble earrings, you might end up having to make a dozen different versions to cater to the different head sizes, because there are no bones. In their infinite wisdom, obviously IMVU did not foresee people making original heads. There are no bone locators for the ears. There's no movable or modifiable targets that creators can use to adjust target points, I guess, for want of a better way of putting it. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that the underlying skeleton is not just a single head bone, but there were reference points or bones, nodes, whatever IMVU would have used for the ears, maybe the nose, the lips, the eyelids, whatever they might have thought of using. But even then, those would be fixed points in space that would then become useless if someone changes the structure of the mesh. So you have to watch out for that when you are making accessories, earrings in particular. So these work fine for the default head, but not for some of the ones that have more realistic heads. So yeah, the earrings might appear at her cheekbones or at the top of her ears or something like that. So there we have making. How long did that take? Ooh, an hour and a half. Not bad, not bad. So we've made 2 sets of earrings, a single bauble grenade earring, and just a double bauble earring. And of course, if you were going to make each side unique, you would, once you've duplicated, you then create a different set of materials. You can do this at any point. You could do this now or right at the beginning if you were going to make 2 earrings. So you would create another set of materials. So your earrings would eventually have 6. Let's say if you wanted each of these to be a completely different colour. And export those as normal, and then you would get your earrings. Each one being customizable. So, any questions, class? Ooh, and we don't seem to have that much of a delay either, which is really cool. Nice. Just wait for chat to catch up. Need some incidental music whilst that happens. Wow. That's cool. This has probably been the least delayed stream that we've had so far, which is really funny. So it's got to be like 10 seconds. Yeah, that's all it is just practice. So, you know, it would be the same with a ring. Rings may be even more of an issue as using small heads, because you might have the hands, they might have the rings in the right place for the hands, but when they use scalers or different sized hands, you're not aligned, so you end up with dozens of different versions of the same product to fit. Ooh, yeah. Yeah, possibly, yeah. Not that many people streaming. Not many gluttons for punishment. So I will, off camera, off screen, I'll upload these and make them derivable, and then see what people derive and do with them. Very simple. And again, because the UV maps are very simple, they're very easy to derive from and create textures for, as you saw. Just, where is it? Here we go. That's all they are, just simple, very, very simple, straightforward textures. Which means they're dead easy to derive from. Right, well, I guess we can call it quits there then. So thank you for watching. So this is day 11, so tomorrow is day 12, and that is the last day. So it will be Christmas or Boxing Day, depending on where you are in the world. No. Well, I don't know. Might do a New Year's, not a New Year countdown, but might do a New Year Twitch. Yes, Miyaka, Boxing Day is, but of course we have to consider that polystyrene is in the future in Australia land. So Christmas for us, streaming at midnight on Christmas Day would be, well, it would switch over to Boxing Day for myself and for Polly, but it would still be Christmas Day for you guys in the States. But we'll see. We'll see if we do a New Year's Day or New Year's Eve stream. Right, so on that note then, we should call it party on. Yeah, cats don't party, they kind of slink about moodily, looking disapprovingly at people, making noise. Why are you disturbing my sleep? The cat purrs as it wanders between the legs of the people partying, who mistake it for affection. Crab legs and crawfish. And tripping people, yes, that's what cats do best. Trip. Alright folks, yeah, we'll call it quits there. That's an hour and 40 minutes of making an accessory, and of course, as per yesterday, if you were just doing it, it possibly wouldn't take this long, but obviously because we're having to explain everything as we go to make it clear so that we know what's going on. Well, oh, are you posting a link to the picture of your cat? Oh, it's plots. Okay. Right, alright then. We shall see you back here tomorrow, I guess, on Christmas Day, Boxing Day. Oh, on Instagram. Okay. So thanks very much for sticking through all 11 days so far. It's been very, very interesting seeing other creators making stuff. So, yeah, on that note, cheerio everyone, and we shall see you tomorrow. Bye for now.